Hello and welcome back to the Copa Club podcast. We are continuing our Copa America journey. We've spoken to people about Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay, but today we are putting Ecuador in the spotlight, and I'm delighted to be joined by Diego, the man behind the Twitter account FC Plantain, the Ecuadorian expert. So we're going to hear from him, lean on his thoughts and find out a little bit more about a potential dark horse for this competition. Diego, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's always a pleasure to talk about Ecuadorian football, particularly when it's in English. So I'm really excited for today's podcast.
Yeah, great stuff. And look, we won't touch on the World Cup too much because that was probably a huge disappointment for Ecuador, failing to get out of that group, losing to Senegal in that final group stage round 2-1, and ultimately wasn't good enough to get out of the group. And Ecuador have shifted since, and they've appointed a man who was in that group managing Qatar at the time in Felix Sanchez, and probably outside in from a European and UK audience. Felix Sanchez, well, look, they've seen him manage a few games for Qatar and probably thought, what on earth are Ecuador hiring this guy for? But if you dig a bit deeper into his CV, Felix Sanchez's CV is rather impressive, isn't it? He started off at the youth academy with Barcelona, and then was brought into this huge project at Qatar with Aspire Academy, working his way up through international levels from under-17, under-19s, eventually to the senior squad. And look, he had success with Qatar. There's no denying that. He won the Asian Cup in 2019, which was very unexpected. And you can turn around and say the World Cup was a bit of a disaster for them, but I'm not exactly sure what people were expecting. But he's come across to Ecuador. And Diego, what was your first thoughts about the appointment?
Well, I think that along with many people, I was not very happy with that appointment because we did not have all of his CV in hand when he was appointed. So having him come in being the worst manager of the World Cup and home soil was a little bit disappointing for everybody here. But then when you start thinking about what the Federation has wanted to do since they were instated, is they wanted a European coach. They wanted to progress Ecuadorian football. They tried with Jordi Cruyff, which ultimately was an absolute failure. Then they brought in Gustavo Alfaro almost at the last minute to try and save face. And then he worked out quite well, I'd say, up until the World Cup, until the final World Cup match. And then they're back to their original plan, which was to appoint a good-looking European coach that could bring a little bit of success. So I think that most people have been quite unhappy about his appointment. And I would classify myself as one of those that have not been very happy. But it is what it is. It's what the Federation wanted, and now we just have to back him, I guess.
What's your thoughts now? And potentially because I'm an outside-in point of view from a European audience, I'm quite surprised by your response considering his CV and what he achieved with Qatar. I know the World Cup was a disaster, but Qatar were never going to go far in that competition. There's a lot of media hype both ways around that particular nation. But look, let's look at the World Cup qualifying campaign and where Ecuador sit now, sitting in 5th place, 8 points after 6 matches, which should be 11 due to Byron Castillo's in the previous World Cup qualifiers, whether there was a debate around his birth certificate. I believe it was like bordering Colombia. So that's why Ecuador have lost 3 points there, because otherwise you don't be a point off the top 3. Only conceded 3 goals. Yes, Ecuador have only scored 5. But as a whole, the World Cup qualifying have been rather steady. So what's your thoughts on Felix Sanchez now? Or are you still a little bit unsure about his potential?
If you take a step back and you look at his numbers, in the World Cup qualifiers, I think he has 61% of points gained, which is the highest number of any manager that's ever managed the Ecuadorian national team in modern qualifying era. And I think that if you just take a step back and look at that, you must be saying he's doing fantastic. But then when you start watching him play, he's gotten results. He should be a little bit higher in the table, bar the Byron Castillo 3-point penalty. But his style of play does not suit us. We do not play as well as we can play with the amount of players that we have the amount of talent pool that we have available. So I think that even though he's done okay numbers-wise, I think what we have seen on the pitch has really not lit up anybody's expectations, I don't think.
He sort of moved to a 3-5-2 formation or a 5-3-2 utilising wing backs. And if you look across that defensive three, you can see why Ecuador have only conceded 3 goals. Piero Hincapié, who's just had that amazing season for Leverkusen, William Pacho, 22 at Frankfurt, and of course Felix Torres, who's just had a big money move to Corinthians, and like he's been key. He scored a couple of goals during the World Cup qualifiers, and then obviously there's Estupinan from Brighton on the left flank as well. Like defensively, Ecuador are pretty solid. So you're telling me a different side of the story. They've only conceded 3 goals. Is it more from an attacking point of view where Ecuador are struggling, or is that because of Sanchez's tactics?
I think it's a mix of both things. It's inevitable that we do not have any striker available. Our best striker, Michael Estrada, kind of went to the MLS, then he went to the Liga MX, then he was in Bulgaria for a little bit, and he was the only outlet that we had that we could play in Felix Sanchez's style, but he was not at the form required. So then he had to call up a couple of other players, and in reality, it's not been working for us attacking-wise. Defensively, as you mentioned quite well, we have probably one of the best three backs in the continent, so that's not an issue. But then if you look at how he has tried to play with a 5 at the back, he's tried to play with a local player that's called Ortiz. He's been fantastic, but he's a classic defensive midfielder, and he's played him as a wingback. So it's a little bit of not using the correct players that he has at his disposal. And it might be because he does not have the proper players to play at wingback, but I don't know. It's very, very, very difficult for me to pinpoint exactly what's wrong with Felix Sanchez, but it just doesn't look right when you're on the pitch. It's like if he's not maximizing what Ecuador has generally had as talents, which has been attacking down the wing, using strikers in order to just push the ball in. So I don't know what it exactly is, but it just doesn't look right in the pitch. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not, but it's just something that does not match what is expected of the Ecuadorian national team.
No, it's really interesting to hear, because I think a lot of people who will be looking at your results, that you only lost 1 game so far in the World Cup qualifiers, and that was because of to Argentina, and it was down to a Lionel Messi free kick late on in the second half, and that was a 1-0 defeat, and then went on to beat Uruguay at home 2-1. Kendry Paez on his debut was a bit of a sensation in that, and he's gone on to obviously do even better things, and we'll get on to him in a minute. Beating Bolivia away from home is obviously no easy result, but then a couple of disappointing results, 2-0 draws against Venezuela, Colombia, and then just edging past Chile. So when you probably look into it a little bit deeper, do you have concerns in the Copa America if and when Ecuador come up against the big side? How do they score? Because you will have to probably score 2 in a game, and you've only done that on 2 occasions, 1 at home, which is an advantage obviously for teams playing in Quito, and then against Bolivia, who obviously one of the worst teams ranked in South America. So is there cause for concern potentially if and when Ecuador get out of that group stage?
I do think that there's concern. My primary concern is actually not getting out of the group stage. Traditional Ecuador has been terrible in Copa America. I think that we've won just a couple of games in the last few decades, so we never perform in the Copa America. And if you add to this that when you're playing short tournaments, you need to have a goal scorer that is actually in form, that we currently do not have available, then we're going to be heavily reliant on our defense. And even though I have 100% confidence in our defense, if we can't score, ultimately the best thing that we can do is scrape through with 3 points due to 3 draws. So I'm a little bit worried. I'm hoping that somewhere and somehow one of our strikers hits a peak of form that can take us through the group stage. And then perhaps if we do go through, then I can start dreaming of something a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, because we touched on the strikers, so there's a list of players at the moment who have featured heavily during the World Cup qualifiers. Enner Valencia, obviously back end of his career now. Kevin Rodriguez, obviously he made a move to Belgium, but both of those have been injured for large parts of the season. Rodriguez is only just coming back to full fitness, and with the Copa America around about 40 days away from the time of recording, there's a little bit of a concern. And then Gonzalo Plata, who's obviously found his way out in Qatar, which is seems to be a bit of a red flag, anyone moving to that particular league or that particular part of the world at the moment for progression. I'm starting to sort of agree with you, and it comes to that realization that where are the goals going to come from? And look, Enner Valencia has been so reliable, but I think the fact that he's not been, I don't think he's even played a minute at the time of recording either. And obviously with Kevin Rodriguez, a huge project, prodigy who's come through from Del Valle, a massive promising team in Ecuador, and obviously gone to Belgium, but he's only just returned from injury towards the back end of the season, so he doesn't really have time to sort of get fit and firing ready for Copa America. So it's almost as if Ecuador are heading into this with a lack of strikers or lack of fit strikers. However, Ecuador have their ultimate trump card just in behind in that number 10 role in Kendry Paez, the wonder kid, the 17-year-old. I'm already running out of words for. He's, ever since signing for Chelsea, I try and relate it to when Endrick first signed for Real Madrid. There was a lot of pressure there and he didn't score for like 10, 12 games and the media were on him. And Kendry Paez signs for Chelsea, and then the performances he's been putting in for Del Valle in the league and in the Libertadores has been nothing but exceptional. The way he's finishing, the way he operates in the final third, that mentality in terms of how he just glides through the pitch and the confidence he has. And he only turned 17 last month, and he could already be Ecuador's main man going into Copa America, which sounds mad to say. And if you look at his statistics a little bit further, he was the youngest ever goal scorer in last year's Under-20 World Cup, scored his first goal against Bolivia in the World Cup qualifiers, got his first assist on debut against Uruguay, which was the winner to make them Ecuador win 2-1 in that match. So he's instantly, anything he touches, whether it's for Del Valle or Ecuador, it's just magical. And I'm sure you echo my thoughts, Diego, on Kendry Paez, and surely you must be getting excited about him.
Absolutely. It's impossible not to get excited of what possibly is our best attacking talent since Ivan Caviedes. So yes, everybody's excited about him. I have the opportunity to watch him in the local league. I thought he was going to do well, but this season he's probably been one of the top 3 players of the whole league. And that at 16, now 17, is unbelievable. Then you watch, as you said, his Copa Libertadores performances, where he's just... the last game that he played against Palmeiras was sensational. I thought he was fantastic, and he was let down a little bit by the rest of his team just to push it through the line at the end. But yes, he's exciting. He's an exciting player. He can play in the number 10 role. Felix Sanchez also likes to throw him out in the right wing, which is interesting because that's how he scored his first goal. He's fast. He has stamina. He has a really good football IQ on the pitch. The sky's the limit for the guy, and I hope that he can actually produce everything that's expected from him, and that it translates really, really well into the national team. He had, as I'm not sure if you were aware, he had that issue where he had a little bit of an indiscipline issue with the national team. So we're not quite sure how that's going to affect him going into the Copa America, as it was in U.S. soil that he had his little bit of indiscipline. Hopefully he can put that behind him. Hopefully he can get a couple of old heads backing him and actually showing him what he can do and what he cannot do. And if all goes well, I'm expecting him to be one of the main faces in world football over the next decade, probably.
A couple of questions on the back of that. In terms of, I know you said Sanchez has put him on the right wing, and we've seen him cut in numerous times and use that left foot to the goal. If people have missed it, go and check out the first and the opening goal against Palmeiras, and the way he cuts inside and uses his left foot. We haven't seen a play like that in a very long time across the world, really. And I was on a podcast last night talking with a lot of excited Chelsea fans, as they've been linked with Esteval as well. So we were talking about how they're all going to fit in. But Kendry Paez, a couple of questions for you here. First and foremost, a number 10 or a right winger in your eyes? Where would you like to see him operate long term for the national team?
For the national team, I'd like to see him as a number 10. I think he's an ideal partner to a sole striker. And if need be, he can play in a right wing role. But the number 10 is what suits him. He's got the talent. He's got the magical foot. So let him do what he does best.
And also, just to sort of touch on that, yes, he's going to Chelsea, and this is going to be a build-up for my second question, and more of a long-term post-Copa America. He has built a nice relationship with Moises Caicedo on the pitch, especially his debut against Uruguay. The way they were just sort of working together, looking for each other on the ball. There was that nice relationship, and Chelsea fans could have been watching that, getting very excited. However, people who aren't Chelsea fans and looking at this particular transfer, Kendry Paez, I don't like to throw the word generational around too much, but I think with the likes of Esteval and Kendry Paez, I have done, so I will stick with it. But Kendry Paez moving to Stamford Bridge, what's your thoughts on that, are you a little bit hesitant about the move, or do you think the Premier League is the right step for Paez, or would you prefer him to, if you could choose, for his next step to be somewhere else in Europe, from a selfish point of view in terms of looking after Ecuador and your future for future Copa Americas, World Cups, etc.? What are you making of this move for Paez to Chelsea? Do you think it's in his best interest or not?
I do think it's in his best interest because he's going to a club that has great working relationships with other clubs in Europe. So if worst comes to worst and he cannot adapt as quickly as Chelsea expect him to, he can be loaned out to one of the clubs that they have an excellent working relationship with, whether that be in France, which is one of the clubs that was being touted, I believe, as a possible destination if he does not adapt, or even the Netherlands. So I think that that's the correct move. I think that every Ecuadorian football player dreams of either playing in one of the top two of La Liga or in the Premier League. And generally, they do not specify where in the Premier League they want to play. So I think getting one of your dream moves as quickly as he had in his career will only be positive for him. And I think that the sooner he leaves Ecuador, the better for him. So I'm really excited for him to turn 18, to go to Europe, to see if he adapts as quickly as he can to Chelsea, if they take him into account, whether that be as a rotational player, as a first-team player, or even as an initial loanee, which is what Caicedo had to do before he cemented his place in Brighton. I think that it's only positive for him.
And there's a few young players leaving the likes of De Valle and coming across to Europe. And obviously, you've just said there how you want them to sort of move across and can't wait for them to learn and progress. And we've not spoke about him off the podcast, but I interviewed him for one of my previous magazines, and that's Alan Minder, who has made a real impact and a real statement in Europe. And obviously, he's recently had his call up to the national team, and potentially, I've been thinking this whilst we've been talking, and he's been playing in as a striker for Cercle Bruges. I don't think that's probably his best position, but he's showing capable abilities in that final third. And when I sat down and spoke with him, you could just see the mentality he had to succeed. Like when I was asking a few cheesy questions, perhaps some reflection about his style and comparison, if he was to explain it to a European audience, he was turning around and going, there isn't anybody. I'm Alan Minder. But it wasn't in like a cocky way. It was very much like I'm here to make a statement. And his projection over the last 10 months has been incredible. So yes, Kevin Rodriguez is injured and a few of the older players are Enner Valencia, and there's a striker issue there. But there's a lot of positives, isn't there, in terms of Kendry Paez and Alan Minder. But do you think Alan Minder, obviously the squads haven't been decided yet, but Alan Minder, could he play a key role in the US this summer?
I think he can. He's had a fantastic season, as you just said. And when he got called up to his only international call-up so far, he was explosive. You could see that the desire was there, and he played a really good match until he got injured. So I think that he definitely has a possibility of making it up there, particularly, as you said, that he's been playing as a striker, as a second striker, or on the wing. So I think that he's quite versatile as well for the team. I think that Sanchez Vaz will keep him in mind, and he's had a good season, good enough to be called up.
Are there any other key players you want to touch upon from the squad which you haven't spoken about, or plays you personally, say that Sanchez is brushed aside, Diego, you're in as the manager, any key players who you feel like, do you know what, if Ecuador are going to run deep or go into this tournament with real ambitions, like who are the key players who the European audience should be looking at who they wouldn't necessarily know about?
I'm going to touch upon two. One I'm just going to mention by name because the European audiences already know him quite well. From last season, they praised him quite highly. At the beginning of season, they kind of brought him down a little bit, which is Moises Caicedo, who I considered before Kendry Paez appeared to be the biggest talent that Ecuador had produced since Ivan Caviedes, since Aguinaga, and some big names. But he's definitely one of the key parts to our team working very well. And hopefully he gets used in the correct position by Sanchez Vaz. But secondly, he is another player who's a familiar name to European audiences, but perhaps not so much, is newly promoted Jeremy Sarmiento, who helped Ipswich get promoted in a rotational role more than anything. But I think that he can be a pivotal player for the squad. He's a winger that plays different to how Latin American wingers traditionally play. So instead of winning the line and then putting a cross in, he has a little bit of the Kendry Paez idea. He gets in, he cuts in, and then he takes a shot or he tries to generate an assist or a key pass. I think he's going to be very important when we play South American squads because they're not used to defending against wingers like that. He's very talented, he's very young, He fits in very well with the group. He's very well liked by everybody, and I think he will have a great impact if he stays fit.
Almost feels, I know we're going to keep looping back to it, but it almost feels it's just that striker role which is missing. The wingers are there, the defence is sound, Moises Caicedo in the middle. But let me just go back to Moises Caicedo for a second, because obviously last season he was superb for Brighton, and then this year, maybe to do with the transfer fee more than anything and the amount of money Chelsea have been throwing about as to why he's potentially had a poor season. But he's almost highlighted on social media anytime he has a poor game. Surely that's going to play on his mindset coming into Copa America to an extent, and potentially that worrying for Ecuadorians. Although he has delivered throughout the World Cup qualifying in terms of, like I said, his relationship with Kendry Paez in the middle, he's been pretty solid. Maybe he's using it as a almost, you can look at Copa America as a reset button, okay, using it as a way to get rid of the constant pressure of playing for Chelsea with that £100 million plus price tag on his back, and go and show what he was all about, which took him to that position in the first place. What's your thoughts on that with Caicedo? Do you think the season's impacted him in a negative way, or do you think he's going to be buzzing, excited to go to Ecuador and show what he can do for his country?
First of all, I'd have to say that he's never had a bad game for the Ecuadorian national team. He's never been anything lower than a 7 out of 10 when he's played for the national team. He had a difficult time at Chelsea, and then you could tell that he was a little bit down. But I think that since last month, he's picked up his performances. You can see he's back on social media. I think he took a break from that. I think mentally he's doing well again. So I'm excited to having that Moises Caicedo back. The Moises Caicedo from Brighton, the Moises Caicedo that debuted in Independiente del Valle, and the Moises Caicedo that we've been able to see in the last 5 or 6 matches for Chelsea.
Yeah, definitely. Let's hope so, because he's going to be such a key player, and obviously keeping that relationship with Kendry Paez in the middle will be massively important. We've touched upon the group stage already, but let's just dive into it a little bit deeper, because it's unknown territory for Ecuador with a couple of their opponents. Venezuela, who obviously you drew 0-0 with, frustratingly, I can say, I think, in the World Cup group stage, and then Mexico and Jamaica. So Jamaica probably shouldn't be a threat for Ecuador, but Mexico is going to be a really interesting game, and I feel like that could set the tone for Ecuador if they are to progress in the group stage, or how their knockout tournament could go. Is there any potential banana skins in there for you? Are you worried about Mexico?
I'm always worried about Mexico. They seem to always get the upper hand on us. We've played them a couple of times in important tournaments. The ones that I can remember, the 1993 Copa America at home. Then we played them in the World Cup. I believe it was the 2002 World Cup, where we lost against them. So they've not been a good opponent for us. They're a little bit of a bogey team for us. So I'm always worried about them. I'm worried about the whole group stage, if I'm being honest. Venezuela, very strong team. They've found a little bit of form. They have a fantastic goalkeeper who actually plays in Ecuador. Jamaica, an unknown quantity for Ecuador, but I know that they have some great players like Leon Bailey. They have a couple of defenders. I believe that the Brentford defender Pinnock plays for them. So they have a team that we should be worried about. I think that we have to take every single one of these matches very seriously if we want to go through. And I'm still 50-50 on whether we're going to go through the group stage or not.
Interesting. For me, it's a toss-up between Ecuador and Mexico, but Mexico look like they can be free scoring, and obviously since talking to you, I was quietly optimistic about Ecuador's chances of a strong tournament. But it appears to be the case that, yeah, defensively absolutely sound, as we've mentioned, 3 of the best centre-backs in the tournament combined together. And it almost seems like Copa America could be a huge learning curve for the young sort of strikers, Kevin Rodriguez, Alan Minder, Kendry Paez, setting up for the next World Cup in terms of that. I know Ecuador fans won't be looking at it like that. Well, no, since speaking to you, you've been very, shall I say, pessimistic about Ecuador's chances. But do you see Copa America more as, look, let's hopefully Felix Sanchez can integrate some more youth, get some more experience into the national team, and looking at more of a long-term project? Or are you going into it with, do you know what, if we get out of the group stage here, we've only lost to Argentina during the World Cup qualifiers, and that was thanks to a Lionel Messi free kick. Ecuador in knockout tournament with a manager. Yes, he didn't perform in the World Cup, but he took Qatar all the way to the Asia Cup final and won it. So he knows tournament football. I'm trying to get a little bit of positivity out of you, Diego.
No, not necessarily. I might sound pessimistic, but it's just me being a realist with what I've seen with Ecuador traditionally in the Copa America, added on to the fact that I'm not a big fan of Sanchez Vaz generally. But yes, as soon as the Copa America season starts, you'll see a completely different me. I'll be very optimistic. I think that we're going to win all 3 games. And right now, I'm just trying to temper expectations to not be let down again in the Copa America. But yes, hopefully Sanchez Vaz hits the same form that he did when he took Qatar to their first international tournament. Hopefully all of the players are fit and ready. Hopefully one of the strikers starts scoring goals. I'm excited for the Copa America. I don't want it to seem like I'm not, and that I'm very pessimistic, and that I'm hoping that we lose, which is not the case. But yes, I'm excited. Hopefully we can go through, and if we go through to the knockout stage, we can have another chat, and then I'll let you know how I'm feeling about that.
Look, Diego, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about Ecuadorian football. It's been a really good insight as to where you're at. But look, let's sign off with a quickfire Q&A, and hopefully then we can finish on a real high, real positive. So look, Kendry Paez, his ceiling is massively high. Do you think he's going to be the standout player for maybe not only Ecuador, but for the whole of South America?
I think so, yes. There's 2 or 3 names that can be there, and he's one of them.
Who are the other 2 you're keeping an eye on?
I think that Vini Jr. is one that he's a little bit older than they are, but I think he's fantastic. And Endrick, he's quite the talent. We saw him last week in Ecuador, and he was sensational.
Which team, if you make it to the knockout stage, which team would you actively want to avoid?
Argentina.
And if you were to make it to the final, who would be Ecuador's dream opponent for you personally?
Chile or Colombia, I think.
Chile or Colombia, yeah. And I know you said you're in 2 ways about potentially leaving the group stage, but like, gun to your head, Diego, where are Ecuador going to bow out of the 2024 Copa America?
I think we make it past the group stage and we lose in the first direct knockout.
Okay. That's slightly more positive than where we were a few minutes ago. So that seems like a nice place to leave it. Great. Look, Diego, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. For anyone who's listening, you can watch this on YouTube or listen to us on Apple or Spotify. We've already covered Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and now thanks to Diego, Ecuador. We'll be covering the other nations with other guests as we head to the very beginning of Copa America. And we'll also have a very special guest, which I will keep to myself for the time being, but further announcements will be on the Copa Club. But Diego, once again, thank you very much for coming on.
No, it was a pleasure.